three prominent white men stood up one after the other and said, "We are not going to talk about racism." And I stood up in full uniform as a white police chief and said, "Yes, we are."
Hey, everybody. This is Perpetual Motion, a podcast focused on self-care, communication, personal finance, and positive relationships. I'm your host, Dr. Mo Anderson. In today's episode, we are chatting with former police chief Ed Cronin. His unique law enforcement leadership journey brought long-term, sustainable change to crime-plagued neighborhoods in Massachusetts by breaking away from conventional responses to crime. Chief Cronin says police can be more just in their work and help to create a more equal and inclusive democracy. We'll learn more about how he's proven his theory today. First, however, I need one quick favor, folks. If you're new to the show or a returning visitor, let's make this official and hit that subscribe button now. So let's go.
You can't say Dr. Mo ain't tell ya that fear magnifies the consequences of failure. What are you scared of? Why are you afraid? I'd rather live like I'm dying than live to die. Any day, my heart is pure, my soul is safe.
Welcome, Chief. I want to jump right in here. In Massachusetts, you started new concepts of systems thinking and community policing to solve the urgent problems of both the high murder rate and high school dropout rate. Who did you involve in developing and implementing this system?
Basically, you did mention that when I came in, I took over a city, small urban city of 45,000 people that had a higher murder rate per capita than the city of Boston, our capital.
Wow.
And at the same time, I had a dropout rate of minority students of over 40% at the high school. And I began trying to work in the community by elevating substantially the enforcement policies, which is what the mayor wanted me to do. And I was like, okay, let's start with that. And we went from serving the first year I came in, we put together a task force of regional cities and towns. And we had served something like 21 search warrants in the city the year I came in. And after I was there a year, the following year, we served 140 search warrants.
Oh, my goodness.
Now, that's like off the charts, okay? And I suppose the good part about that was all the other services in terms of enforcement went way up also, from traffic tickets to you name it. So I guess in some sense there was a morale lifting, okay?
Mhm.
But the bottom line was it didn't work. And the problem just kept getting worse.
And I would imagine there was some outcry in the community as well when that occurred.
Well, this is where I had a learning process. And it wasn't until a woman came along, a woman by the name of Syra Pinto, who was hired through a grant from the local community college to come in and work with the local high school to see if she could do practices and methodology or whatever it would need to raise the performance of the Latino students. And she decided to put together a task force. She came to me and asked me if I would be a part of that task force. And as she said to me later on, she says, "You were just check the list thing," because I figured the police weren't going to be interested. And I said to her, I was very frustrated. I says, "Who do I talk to in the Latino community? I mean, like, I don't even know where to start, and, what's going on?" And then she posed a question to me. She says, "Well, what are you doing about it?" And I kind of thought about it and then she followed it up with, "Well, you got all the power. You got millions in your budget. You got cars. You got firearms. You got everything. So what are you doing about it?" And for the first time, I heard the whole problem differently.
Mm-hmm.
And we began to talk more, went out to lunch. And before you know it, she was bringing in Latino mothers to meet with me. And I would listen to their stories. And many times some of them would blast me about how prejudiced my officers were, about how racist the schools were, and all these other things. And I chose not to respond. I didn't say wait or hold up or excuse. I just listened. So one day I got in my car and I went up to the local high school just to check it out on a whim.
Mm-hmm.
And just so happened, I pulled up in front of the high school and there was the school disciplinarian yelling at a Latino kid standing outside the building. And he said something to him along the effect of, Jose, you turn 16 next week. And at 16, you're out of here. You're expelled. Okay. And in Massachusetts, they can do that. They can kick them out at 16. So what I really saw was, for the first time, I realized, wait a minute, where's these kids going to go? They're going to go on the streets. They're going to go into crime. They're going to come to drugs. They're going to come to the police. They're going to be my problem.
Right. They're
And
not qualified to do anything, and they're
no,
underage.
but it was
Yeah.
the first time in my life I realized, wait a minute, this isn't even a police problem.
Mm-hmm. It's
This
a
is
whole community problem. Yeah.
this is exactly. So I finally got it, and it started to open my eyes. And then when I used systems thinking, and Syra was also, thank God, a systems thinker also, and we began to look at why things were occurring in our community the way they were, and we decided to put together a systems thinking task force to train them up, 40 community leaders, including minority members for the very first time, to be trained up by professionals to come up with the reason why crime was occurring in the city. And we did that. And after 3 days of work and breakouts and charts and all types of drawings, we came up with two things. And a young Latino man stood up and said, these are the two findings. The first is the lack of economic opportunity for at-risk kids. And the second was the presence of systemic racism in society. And the first thing that happened was 3 prominent white men stood up, one after the other. One was the publisher of the newspaper. The other 2 were college presidents, stood up one after the other and said, we are not going to talk about racism. And I stood up in full uniform as a white police chief and said, yes, we are.
That took courage. I'm surprised and not surprised that a college president was part of that. No, I'm not surprised. It just makes me sad because I hear it so much. I'm going to take that back. And good for you is the main thing I want to say. I'm interrupting you to say thank you for having that courage, because that is still the reaction of so many when they hear that.
Well, I got to put one, I wouldn't say a qualifier on their behavior, but I did partially see what they were saying was, hey, we didn't come here for a huge discussion. We came here to, we thought we were doing a fundraiser or something like that. And this was like, I think they were thinking, whoa, wait a minute, this is way out of bounds for me. You know what I mean? I wasn't ready for this. So I would give them that grace.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
I
fair.
actually follow-up meeting with one of them. And, I stressed the importance of it. And you're right, they didn't want to get involved. But anyway, so we went ahead. And one of the first things we did was the organizations that were involved, we all put money in a kitty to create jobs for at-risk kids. So I was pulling in all kinds of money on those search warrants for drug raids. I was seizing bank accounts, cars, houses, you name it, okay? And we'd use it for more enforcement. Only this time I took a big chunk and I used it for jobs.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
That
And then,
is creative, and I can't see anybody objecting to the use of those funds for that purpose. That's great.
well, the only people that would object to it would be the police. officers because I had to do it in secret. Because if I had done it at the time, my police officers would have been extremely angry with me because they couldn't see it doing a long-term good for our community.
Gotcha.
Um,
Wow.
yeah.
I
So,
love the collaboration and the creativity. And if you have
yeah.
to do things in secret sometimes until people can see the proof in the pudding, so that's what you have to do. You weren't breaking any laws, I'm sure,
No,
but
and the beautiful part is Massachusetts has a very strict law that says any drug money seized is at the complete discretion for spending of the chief of police. I don't need the mayor, the council, nobody.
wow.
So I had every right to do that. So
I love it. What were the results quickly? What were the results of this and in what amount of time did you start to see results, Chief?
after the first summer, the violent crime rate began to go down.
Love it.
And I worked about a year later, there was a significant incident that happened. I was working, I wasn't working, I was at home. I got a call in the middle of the night, and a young black man, 19 years old, was driving a car into our city, and he was being chased by our state police for some. As it turned out. But because it was a car chase, one of my officers got involved. And they ended up stopping this vehicle on a side street in the city. And my officer's car blocked this young man's car, so he couldn't move. He had to stop. And the state trooper got out of the car to walk over to the kid that was behind the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And the kid panicked, put it in drive, and went towards my officer with his car. And the state trooper took his gun out and shot him, killed him. So I got that on my plate. So what happened? So the first thing I did was, what I didn't mention with this systemic thinking was I did hundreds of meetings with people prior to this, building relationships in the community with both the Black and the Latino community. And I immediately went to the leadership in the community, the Black community, and I went to them. And I remember sitting in my car with Adrian half the night, talking with him, chatting with him, and concerned and all these other things. And then the next morning, I got a call from a local pastor, African American gentleman who had become a great friend. And he said to me, "What happened, Chief?" And I said, "Tommy, this is what I know." I says, "I'm not going to give you any baloney. All right, I'm going to tell you exactly what happened." And he said, "Well, if you said it happened that way, I believe it." And I said, "The only other thing I can tell you is my officer was Black, was Dougie. And Dougie told me, and I asked him personally about the whole thing. He said, if the trooper didn't shoot him, he was going." So I'm not putting any judgment on this one way or another. But that was the facts as I knew them. So the next evening, there was a protest march. And we had turned out, police and everything else. And the march went up Main Street. And again, hiding. I took my car and I hid on the side streets to watch the march. Because if I came out as the police chief at that particular time, I would have been seen as aiding a criminal. But
Right.
I knew
I'm going to say at any particular time. I don't think that's changed that
yeah,
much in most
well,
places. So I understand. Yeah.
so I kept my eyes on everything. They finally went to the upper part of Main Street, the upper common, we call it. I sat there. They had a few speeches. It was a peaceful protest, and it was over. About a week later, Adrian, the community leader, wrote a big op-ed in the newspaper. And he said that the police were the only agency that showed any empathy.
Wow.
Yeah. There was a lot going on during that time period. But,
And I mean, it's not what you're doing and what you've done is tremendous. It's not something one person can solve, not something that can be, immediately done. But what you're demonstrating is that listening to people, responding and not reacting, and gaining trust and credibility goes a long way toward mitigating these continuously occurring situations. And while we certainly want to see it not happen as frequently, when it does, to have some empathy, and some caring.
thank
Just
you for that brilliant feedback, because it articulated it exactly how I feel. And the capstone of it is humility.
humility, indeed. Indeed. We don't have much time left, Chief. This is such an important conversation. I'm going to have you back, but there are a couple of more topics I want to touch on before we go. And one is you took these strategies, and it sounds like even before you became chief, I thought it was after you became chief, but you took them to an international level, including Ukraine, Siberia, Russia, other places. How did you do that? I think you said they called on you, but how did you translate that into the problems that they had, and what were you addressing in those countries?
Yeah, there was a period of years when I did the work. The first thing I learned was through my education, the problem of domestic violence. And I was really educated very, very well in that area. I was very fortunate. I had a very brilliant mentor, a woman professor. And I began to understand, I think before a lot of other people did in my career, to understand the tough position that women are in society, and learning even more that that goes down even harder for women of color. But moving over into other countries, the countries that I worked in, and even to this day, those countries really don't give the same rights to women as they do to men.
Mm-hmm.
So when I brought ideas and trainings around empowering women, I had a pretty enthusiastic audience that were very happy to learn a lot of this, but also empowered and very, very energized to do something about it. And it kind of culminated when I worked in the country of Moldova, where I had to work with the police, who were very corrupt when I got there. And I used my systems thinking I had. And I started thinking, wait a minute, they have a lot of police officers here. They have a lot of women police officers, but the women weren't part of the power structure. They were second-class citizens.
Mm-hmm.
So I put a lot of my time and energy and funds into training the women police officers.
Nice.
Yeah, so I hooked up with the Swedes and the European Union, and we just sent them into another orbit. Today they have a fabulous women police association. I worked with women over there that I helped work and empower. After I left, one of them became the Minister of Internal Affairs, which is kind of like the Secretary of
Oh,
State.
that's
Yeah.
that's the greatest pat on the back, even as a parent, to see those you tried to help do
And they
well.
elected
And
President Maya
wow,
Sandu, who was a graduate of Harvard University. So,
my,
yeah. So right
that's
now they're in harm's way, but they've got really good, honest people in charge.
absolutely, and I'm glad that you were able to do that. That you had the cooperation of whomever you needed to make that happen, and it wasn't just performative. Because I just did a great interview with a powerful woman out of Austin who specializes in helping corporations with DE&I, and she made a good point about how we can have women say on the force or in the boardroom or in positions, but they're really just there to check a box. And
Right.
they don't get the same opportunities as their male colleagues. And in the United States, as you know, less than 4% of CEOs, Fortune 500 CEOs, are women. Tons of VPs, VP of HR in particular, but to actually break that ceiling and reach that ultimate level of authority and decision making is still a work in progress. And, we like to talk about what's going on overseas in third world countries. And I particularly asked you that question because I knew the great work you've done. But I just have to emphasize we need this happening over here as well. We need more women empowered. And if they have to start their own businesses and companies, so be it. But ideally, we work together and include everyone. Inclusion, indeed. Final question for you, Chief. Again, thank you for your wonderful responses. I am hoping that the listeners will not only learn from this, but perhaps share with members of law enforcement, because I know a lot of departments. I've had other programs about this one with former Chief T. Bowman and a couple of other law enforcement people. And I hope that they'll share. Guys, please share this with your friends and families and connections in law enforcement, because there's a lot to be learned from what Chief Cronin has done successfully. And my last question for you, Chief, is how can we've talked about how organizations can, act more justly and democratic, but how can we as individuals, me in my home, my neighbors, what can we do to promote a more democratic and just society?
Well, I guess I'd have to take that as like a personal question. And I think that, for me personally, I speak up when I see something that's wrong. And especially today, there's so much, as we know, there's so much division out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure arguing with anybody solves anything anymore. But if I see something and I don't like it, or I think it's wrong, and I speak up, you have to say something, you know. I don't know why, this is especially a thing with, older white men, but I don't understand why the thought of giving away power threatens people. When you open up your heart a little bit and you extend a hand to someone, or you affirm another person who needs affirming, or you give that person an opportunity, you're empowering that person. You've taken the power you have and you've given it to another. That's kind of my thing. I always say the best use of power is to give it away.
I agree. I ended my TEDx talk on racism with diversity, collaboration, cooperation leads to better communities, better economies, and less violence. And when you think about the result, the gains over what little bit of power you are distributing, it's not at all equal. It is very clear what needs to be done. You have been a delightful guest. I've just learned so much. And like I said, we'll have to have you back because we could talk and talk and talk. But before we go, tell listeners how they can find you online and connect with you, Chief.
Sure. I have a website. It's www.justpolicing.org. And I have my book, which is Just Policing, My Journey to Police Reform, that came out last year. It's available.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. And I'm also available for talks, both online or through public appearances. Yeah.
Fantastic, folks. Please pick up a copy of his book. From what you've heard today, you can glean how insightful It is. Connect with the chief online, bring him in to consult and chat with your organizations. And thank you so much for listening. Please join us again next week for more insightful, inspiring, and solution-focused news you can use. Thank you.